Two co-workers start the same job on the same day, both earning $100,000 a year. Within 6 months, everyone in the office has an opinion about which one is doing better. The first drives a leased luxury SUV into the parking lot every morning, the kind that turns heads. He lives in a big rented house on the nicer side of town, wears clothes with labels people recognize, and picks up the check at lunch without checking the total first. The second drives a Honda that's older than some of the interns, lives in a small place nobody would call impressive, and wears the same handful of shirts on rotation. If you asked the office who was winning at life, it wouldn't even be close. People made jokes about the Honda in the parking lot. Someone once left a sticky note on the windshield asking if it needed a jump. As a joke, that wasn't entirely a joke. Meanwhile, the SUV got compliments in the elevator at least once a week, and its owner never once corrected anyone who assumed he was doing better than the guy with the beat-up sedan 2 spots down. 5 years later, both of their financial lives get quietly laid bare during a routine mortgage application. And the office was wrong about both of them, in exactly opposite directions. Here's why. And here's the one distinction almost nobody explains clearly enough to actually change how you spend money. Forget the textbook definition of assets and liabilities for a second, because it's technically true and completely useless in real life. Here's the version that actually changes decisions. An asset is anything that pays you whether you show up or not. A liability is anything that charges you whether you use it or not. That's it. That's the entire test. Run the SUV through it. The lease costs $650 a month. It doesn't pay him anything. Ever. No matter how impressive it looks pulling into the office. It just charges him every single month whether he drives it to work or lets it sit in the driveway all weekend. That's a liability, regardless of how it makes him feel walking past it. It doesn't matter how new it smells, how heads turn when it pulls up, or how confident it makes him feel walking into a meeting. None of that changes what the bank statement says every single month. Now run that same $650 a month through an index fund instead. Over 5 years at a typical 8% return, that's roughly $48,000. Over 10 years, it's closer to $120,000. Same $650. One version disappears every month and buys nothing but a feeling. The other version compounds quietly in the background, working while he sleeps, while he's on vacation, while he's not thinking about it at all. One of those numbers shows up in a driveway. The other one shows up in a brokerage statement nobody else will ever see, which is exactly why it's so easy to underestimate. This is the part most people miss completely. It was never really about the SUV. It's about the fact that every single dollar can only do one job at a time. The dollar that goes toward the lease can never also go toward the index fund. You're not choosing between a car and a spreadsheet. You're choosing between a feeling that fades the moment you turn the engine off and a number that keeps growing whether you're watching it or not. Now here's the harder one, the one that actually gets people upset in the comments, because it targets the thing almost everyone has been told is the smartest financial decision they'll ever make. The home they bought young and never left. Picture someone who bought a modest starter home at 25, paid it off diligently over the years, and now, 20 years later, proudly tells people it's their biggest asset. On paper, the house is worth more than they paid for it. It feels like proof they made the right call. But look closer at what that house actually does every single month. Property taxes, insurance, maintenance, the roof that eventually needs replacing, the water heater that always seems to fail on a weekend. Conservatively, that's often $700 to $900 a month in real costs, just to keep living in a property that generates exactly zero income. Break that down and it stops being an abstract number. Property taxes alone often run $300 to $400 a month depending on the area. Homeowners insurance adds another $100 to $150. Routine maintenance averages out to $200 to $300 a month once you account for the years where nothing breaks and the years where the HVAC system decides to quit in July. It doesn't pay them anything. It charges them every month, whether they're home or traveling, whether the market's up or down. Run it through the actual test. And a paid-off home you live in isn't an asset. It's a very comfortable, very expensive liability, and it stays that way until the day it's sold or rented out to someone else. The house isn't even the only version of this trap. It's just the most emotionally protected one, because questioning it feels like questioning someone's biggest life decision. The same pattern shows up in the boat that gets used 4 times a year and costs $400 a month in storage, insurance, and upkeep the other 48 weeks. It shows up in the home gym equipment that costs $3,000 and now serves as an expensive place to hang laundry. None of these are morally wrong to own, but calling any of them an asset simply because they were expensive or because they sit in a place of pride is exactly the kind of quiet self-deception that keeps otherwise smart. Hardworking people broke while looking financially comfortable from the outside. Now, this is usually where someone pauses the video and says, "But the house is going up in value, that has to count for something." And it does. Appreciation is real. But appreciation isn't income. You can't spend a percentage. That rising number on a home appraisal doesn't pay a single bill unless you sell the house, refinance it, or rent it out, and all three of those come with their own costs and complications. Until one of those things happens, that growing number is a nice fact to know. Not money you can actually use. If this is making you rethink something sitting in your own driveway or your own mortgage statement right now, that's exactly the kind of shift this channel exists to walk you through. Subscribe, because we're only getting to the part that actually explains why millionaires build their lives around this distinction on purpose. So why does this specific habit separate people who build real wealth from people who just look like they have? Because millionaires aren't smarter about money in some mysterious way. They've simply made a habit of running every major purchase through that same one-line test before they buy it, and they let the answer actually change their decision instead of just nodding along and buying it anyway. Picture two versions of the same $1,000 decision, made over and over across 10 years. The first version goes toward liabilities every time, things that charge money and produce nothing, the upgraded phone, the nicer car, the bigger television. 10 years later, that money is gone completely. Not reduced, gone. Every dollar of it converted into things that are now worth less than what was paid, if they're worth anything at all. The second version goes toward assets every time, dividend stocks, index funds, a small rental property, a stake in a business. At a realistic 8% average return, $1,000 a year for 10 years grows to roughly $5,600. Same amount of money moving through two different people's hands. One ends with nothing to show for it but memories and depreciated stuff. The other ends with an amount that's now quietly generating more money on its own, without either of them doing another thing. This is the actual mechanism behind almost every wealthy person's math, and it's not complicated once you see it laid out. It's just consistent. The same decision made correctly, over and over, for long enough that the gap becomes impossible to ignore. Watch how that gap actually opens up year by year, because the difference isn't a straight line. It's a curve that starts slow and then takes off. At year 3, the asset path sits around $3,900, barely ahead of what was put in, and honestly, at this point, it can feel like it's barely worth the effort compared to just enjoying the money now. At year 5, it's grown to roughly $7,000, still not dramatic, still the kind of number that's easy to underestimate. But at year 10, it crosses that $15,600 mark, and by year 20, the same $1,000 a year, invested consistently, is worth somewhere around $49,000. The early years feel unimpressive on purpose. That's exactly the stretch where most people give up and redirect the money toward liabilities instead, right before the curve was about to start working in their favor. Now, to be fair, this isn't a clean, simple rule where liabilities are always foolish and assets are always safe, because that's not how money actually works in the real world. A car is technically a liability, but for someone who needs reliable transportation to earn an income in the first place, it's a necessary one. And pretending otherwise is just as dishonest as pretending a leased luxury SUV is somehow an investment. Assets aren't automatically safe either. A rental property with the wrong tenant, a stock picked on a hunch, a small business that never finds its footing, all of these can lose money just as easily as any liability can drain it. The test was never meant to be a guarantee. It's meant to force the honest question before the money leaves your hands, not a promise about what happens after. There's also a version of this that gets misused in the other direction, where someone convinces themselves that anything labeled an investment is automatically smart, even when it's really just a liability wearing a nicer outfit. A timeshare gets sold as an asset. A whole life insurance policy with high fees gets marketed as building wealth. A multi-level marketing business opportunity gets pitched as passive income. Running these through the actual test matters just as much as running the SUV through it, because the label on a purchase was never the thing that determined whether it pays you or charges you. Only the actual cash flow does that. So if the math is this straightforward once you actually look at it, why does almost everyone still lean toward liabilities anyway? Because this was never really a math problem in the first place. It's a psychology problem wearing a financial disguise. Liabilities are visible immediately. The car gets noticed the second it pulls into the lot. The house gets admired the moment guests walk in. Assets, on the other hand, are invisible for years. Nobody's impressed by a brokerage account they can't see. Nobody compliments an index fund. So people quietly trade the thing that would have actually made them free for the thing that makes them look successful right now, today, in front of people whose opinions won't matter in 5 years. Think about how rarely anyone actually asks a coworker how their retirement account is doing, compared to how often someone comments on a new car in the parking lot. The math never had a chance against that kind of social feedback loop. One choice gets applause within the hour. The other gets applause, if it ever comes, a decade later from people who may not even be in your life anymore by then. And that trade comes down to which fear is louder in a given moment. The fear of looking average right now, in front of coworkers, at a family gathering, on a night out, or the fear of still being financially trapped 10 years from now, still needing that same paycheck to survive, still one bad month away from real trouble. Most people spend their entire lives quietly managing the first fear while never fully confronting the second one. Right up until the moment life forces the comparison whether they're ready for it or not. Here's the practical version of all of this, the part you can actually use the next time you're standing in a dealership or scrolling through listings. Before any purchase over a few $100s, ask the one-line question out loud. Does this pay me or does it charge me? If the honest answer is that it charges you, that doesn't mean don't buy it. It means buy it with your eyes open, knowing exactly what job that dollar is doing, instead of quietly telling yourself a story about how it's somehow an investment in your future. The people who build real wealth aren't the ones who never buy liabilities. They're the ones who stopped lying to themselves about which purchases were which. Go back to that mortgage application 5 years later. The one with the least SUV and the big rented house applies, and the numbers come back rough. Almost no savings, a stack of monthly payments that barely leave any breathing room, an approval that comes with a warning about his debt-to-income ratio. The one with the old Honda applies too, and the numbers tell a completely different story. A steady, growing portfolio, a manageable amount saved specifically for exactly this kind of moment, an approval that comes through without a second look. The office had it backwards the entire time. They were watching who looked richer when the actual answer was sitting quietly in whoever wasn't performing wealth at all. Nobody in that office ever saw the actual numbers along the way. They saw a car and a house and drew a conclusion. They saw an old Honda and drew the opposite one. Both conclusions were built entirely on what was visible, and the entire 5 years came down to a decision that was never visible at all. Which side of that one-line test each of them chose to believe, every single month long before anyone else was watching. If this changed how you look at your next purchase, that's exactly why this channel exists. Subscribe, and we'll keep breaking down the parts of money nobody explains clearly.